You know, people always say that grief brings families together, but I am here to tell you that is the biggest lie ever told. Grief doesn't bring people together. Money does. Or rather, the greed for money tears people apart so fast it will make your head spin. I stood there by the open grave, the smell of damp earth and overpriced lilies thick in the air, watching the mahogany casket that held my mother being lowered into the ground. My father had passed just 2 years prior, and now I was truly an orphan. Well, not exactly. I still had Marcus, my younger brother, the golden boy, the one who had moved 3 states away to chase a corporate career while I stayed behind to change diapers, manage medications, and hold our mother's hand through the terrifying fog of dementia. You would think, standing there in the drizzle, that my brother would be gripping my hand, offering me comfort after the hellish 6 months I had just endured as a full-time caregiver. But no. Marcus wasn't holding my hand. He was standing about 5 feet away from me, huddled in a tight circle with our Aunt Linda and a man I didn't recognize, wearing a suit that cost more than my entire car. I tried to catch his eye, just looking for a shred of shared sorrow, something that said, "We're in this together, Evie." Instead, he looked at me with this strange mix of pity and calculation. It sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold wind. I adjusted my black veil, trying to focus on the priest's words, but my hearing seemed to tune out the prayers and tune in to the hushed whispers coming from Marcus's little huddle. "It's tragic, really," I heard Marcus say, his voice pitched low but carrying perfectly in the quiet cemetery. "She's just not herself anymore. I mean, look at her. She's standing there staring at nothing. It's starting to happen to her, just like it happened to Mom." My blood ran cold. I wasn't staring at nothing. I was staring at the casket of the woman who raised me, trying not to collapse from exhaustion and heartbreak. I wanted to march over there and tell him to shut his mouth, but I didn't want to cause a scene. Not today. Not at Mom's funeral. I told myself I was imagining things, that grief was making me paranoid. I took a deep breath and tried to center myself. Speaking of being centered, before I tell you exactly how he humiliated me in front of the entire town, I want to know where you guys are listening from. Pause the video for a quick second and drop a comment below with your city and the time you're watching this. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Okay, so the service ends and we all head back to the house, my parents' house, for the wake. This house was a beautiful, sprawling Victorian that my parents had bought in the 70s for peanuts but was now worth a small fortune in today's market. I knew every creak in the floorboards. I knew which windows stuck in the summer. I had spent the last decade maintaining it, loving it, and filling it with warmth. Marcus walked in like he owned the place, which technically he didn't. Not yet. He immediately started guiding guests into the living room, playing the perfect host, offering drinks and handshakes. I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water because I felt lightheaded. That is when it happened. I set my glass down on the counter to hug a neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, who had brought a casserole. We chatted for maybe 2 minutes. When I turned back around, my water glass was gone. I frowned, looking around the counter. "That's weird," I mumbled. "I just put a glass here." Suddenly, Marcus was right there, his voice booming a little too loudly for the small kitchen. "Oh, Evie, are you losing things again? The glass is right there in the sink. You probably put it there and forgot. You've been doing that a lot lately." The kitchen went silent. Mrs. Higgins looked at me with wide eyes. I looked at the sink. There was a glass in there, but I hadn't put it there. I knew I hadn't. "Marcus, I didn't put it in the sink. I set it right here on the counter." He let out a sigh, a long, dramatic exhale that sounded like he was dealing with a toddler. He turned to Mrs. Higgins and the 3 other people in the kitchen, shaking his head with that fake sad look. "I'm sorry you have to see this." He's confused. "The stress has really triggered her cognitive decline. It's why I'm so worried about her staying in this big house alone. She's too old to manage. She's forgetting things. Yesterday she thought it was Tuesday when it was Friday." "That is a lie." I snapped, my voice trembling. "I never said that." "Marcus, what are you doing?" He stepped closer, putting a hand on my shoulder, acting like he was restraining me. "It's okay, Evie. Calm down. She gets agitated so easily now. It's the early stages, I'm sure of it. Aunt Linda and I have been talking, and we think it's best if we handle the estate. You're clearly not mentally fit to inherit a property of this magnitude. You need care, not a mortgage." I stood there frozen. The room was spinning. He wasn't just being a jerk, he was planting a seed. He was publicly constructing a narrative that I was senile, right there over the potato salad and ham sandwiches. I looked around the room, desperate for someone to defend me, but everyone was looking at the floor or looking at me with that same pity Marcus had feigned at the grave. He smiled at me, a cold, shark-like smile that didn't reach his eyes, and whispered so only I could hear, "Don't fight it, Evelyn. You're tired. Just let me take over." After that horrific scene in the kitchen, I retreated to the safety of my old bedroom, locking the door with trembling hands. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Marcus's words kept echoing in my head. Confused. Too old. The audacity of it made me want to scream, but instead I just sat on the edge of my bed and looked out the window at the sprawling oak tree in the backyard. That tree had a tire swing when we were kids. I was the one who pushed Marcus on it for hours until my arms ached. And now he was the one trying to push me out of the only home I had ever known. Let me paint you a picture of what the last 7 years actually looked like just so you understand why his accusation wasn't just cruel, it was completely delusional. When our dad had his first stroke, I was 28, working as a junior graphic designer in the city, living my best life. Marcus was already climbing the corporate ladder at some investment firm, making 3 times my salary and driving a car that cost more than my college tuition. When the call came that Dad wouldn't be able to walk or speak clearly again, guess who packed up their apartment and moved back home? It wasn't Mr. Investment Banker. For the first 3 years I was Dad's voice and his legs. I managed his physical therapy appointments, I learned how to navigate the nightmare of health insurance claims, and I retrofitted the downstairs bathroom with my own savings so he could shower with dignity. Where was Marcus? Oh, he was slammed with merger season. He would FaceTime once a month, usually while he was walking to a lunch meeting, offering useless advice like, "Maybe you should hire a better nurse, Evie," before hanging up because his latte was ready. He treated our parents like a line item in a budget that was becoming too expensive, while I treated them like human beings who deserved love. Then after Dad passed, Mom's decline hit us like a freight train. It wasn't physical with her, it was the mind. That is the cruelest irony of all. I watched the sharpest, kindest woman I knew slowly lose pieces of herself. I became an expert in redirection, in soothing night terrors, in cooking meals that she would actually eat. I managed the entire household budget. I paid the property taxes. I fixed the roof when a storm blew shingles off 2 years ago. Literally, I hired the contractors, negotiated the price, and supervised the work because Marcus couldn't be bothered to answer my emails about the leak. There was this one winter about a year ago when the ancient boiler in the basement finally gave up the ghost. It was 10 degrees outside. The house was freezing. I called Marcus in a panic because a new boiler was going to cost $5,000 and things were tight. You know what he said? He said, "Just sell the place, Evie. Put Mom in a home. The land value is the only thing that place is going for it anyway. It's a tear down." A tear down. That is what he called the home where he took his first steps. He didn't offer a dime. I ended up selling my car, my beloved little Honda Civic, to pay for that boiler so Mom wouldn't freeze. I took the bus to the grocery store for 6 months. I sacrificed my mobility, my social life, and my career prospects to keep this house standing and our mother safe. And now he had the nerve to stand in my kitchen eating the food I prepared, telling the neighbors that I was the one who was confused. It wasn't just the caregiving though. It was the house itself. This place wasn't just wood and brick to me. It was a living history of our family that I had painstakingly preserved. I knew that you had to jiggle the handle on the back door to get it to lock properly. I knew that the floorboard in the hallway squeaked in a C-sharp note. I knew exactly how the light hit the breakfast nook at 7 a.m. Marcus didn't know any of that. To him, this house was just a massive dollar sign waiting to be liquidated so he could buy a vacation condo in Aspen or upgrade his portfolio. I looked around my bedroom. The walls were still the same soft lavender I had picked out when I was 16. Everything here proved I was capable. The stack of meticulously organized medical binders on my desk proved I was organized. The calendar on the wall, color-coded with appointments and bill due dates, proved I was on top of things. I wasn't forgetting days of the week. I was the only one remembering them. The anger started to replace the shock. I remembered the glass of water Marcus claimed I put in the sink. It was such a small thing, but it was so calculated. He knew Mrs. Higgins was the biggest gossip in the neighborhood. If Mrs. Higgins thought I was losing my marbles, the whole church congregation would know by Sunday morning. He was laying the groundwork to challenge the will. Mom had always said the house would go to me because I was the one taking care of it, but she never updated the paperwork after the dementia set in. The will was old. It split everything 50-50, but with a clause that the executor, currently Marcus because he was the business one, had discretion over asset distribution if a beneficiary was deemed incapacitated. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. He wasn't just being a jerk. He was executing a hostile takeover. He had waited until I was exhausted, grieving, and vulnerable. He knew I had spent the last week barely sleeping, planning this funeral, crying my eyes out. Of course I looked wreck. Of course I was frazzled. He was weaponizing my grief against me. I stood up and walked to the mirror. My eyes were puffy and my hair was a mess, but the woman staring back at me wasn't senile. She was a warrior who had survived the trenches of caregiving. I wiped a smudge of mascara from my cheek. "You are not crazy, Evelyn," I whispered to my reflection. "And you are not letting him take this house." But I knew saying it wasn't enough. Marcus was smart. He was charming. He had a law degree and a suit that commanded respect. I was just the spinster sister in a cardigan who looked tired. If I was going to fight him, I needed to be smarter. I couldn't just scream and cry. That would only prove his point. I needed to watch him. I needed to see how far he was willing to go. Little did I know the water glass incident was just the opening move. He was about to ramp up the gaslighting to a level that would make a psychological thriller look like a children's book. If the funeral was the opening act of Marcus's little play, the week that followed was the main performance, and let me tell you, he was gunning for an Oscar. He didn't go back to the city. Oh no. He generously decided to stay at the house for a few weeks to help me get settled. In reality, he was turning my home into a house of mirrors where I couldn't trust my own reflection. It was like living with a poltergeist, only this ghost wore Italian loafers and drank all my premium coffee. The atmosphere in the house shifted from mournful to suffocating. I felt like I was under constant surveillance. Every time I walked into a room, Marcus would look up from his laptop with that studying gaze, like he was a scientist observing a lab rat for defects. The gaslighting wasn't subtle anymore. It was aggressive, and it was orchestrated perfectly around the times when we had visitors or appointments. The first major incident happened on a Tuesday. We had a meeting scheduled with Mr. Henderson, the family attorney, who was coming over to discuss the preliminary details of the will and the estate transfer. I knew this was my moment to prove I was on top of things. I spent the entire morning organizing a thick binder. I had everything: property tax receipts for the last 5 years, the invoices for the roof repair, the boiler replacement receipt, and a detailed log of Mom's medical expenses that I had paid out of pocket. I wanted Mr. Henderson to see clearly that I was the financial backbone of this household. I placed the blue binder squarely in the center of the dining room table at 9:45 a.m. The meeting was at 10 a.m. I remember looking at it, aligning it with the edge of the table. I went into the kitchen to brew a fresh pot of coffee for Mr. Henderson. I was gone for maybe 4 minutes. When I walked back into the dining room with the tray of mugs, the table was empty. My heart stopped. I set the tray down so hard coffee sloshed over the sides. "Marcus," I called out, panic rising in my throat. Marcus strolled in from the living room, looking the picture of casual innocence. "Yeah. What's up? Where is the binder?" "The blue binder. I just put it right here." I pointed to the empty spot on the mahogany table. He frowned, tilting his head. "What binder?" "I haven't seen a binder, Evie. Are you sure you brought it downstairs? You were scrambling around in your room earlier." "I am not scrambling," I yelled, my voice cracking. "I put it right here 5 minutes ago." Just then the doorbell rang. Mr. Henderson was here. I was hyperventilating. I opened the door, sweat beading on my forehead, looking like a maniac. We sat down and I had nothing to show him. I spent 10 minutes apologizing, digging through piles of mail on the sideboard, looking under the table. Marcus sat there, calm and collected, and said to the lawyer, "I apologize, Mr. Henderson. He's been misplacing things a lot since the funeral. The stress is really getting to her. Maybe we should reschedule until she's more lucid." Mr. Henderson looked at me with deep concern. "It's quite all right, Evelyn. Take your time." Later that afternoon, after the lawyer left, I found the blue binder. It was in the bottom drawer of the refrigerator underneath a bag of apples. I stood there, the cold air hitting my face, staring at it in horror. I knew I didn't put it there. I knew it. But a tiny, insidious voice in the back of my head whispered, But what if you did? What if you are snapping? That is what gaslighting does. It doesn't just make you mad at the other person, it makes you terrified of yourself. But Marcus wasn't done. He needed to escalate the narrative from forgetful to dangerous. 2 days later, I decided to make a roast chicken. Cooking was my therapy. It was muscle memory. I prepped the bird, put it in the oven and set the timer. I went to the porch to read a book while it cooked. About 30 minutes later, I smelled gas. I ran into the kitchen. The oven was off. The gas burner on the stovetop was cranked all the way to high, but the flame wasn't lit. It was just hissing, filling the kitchen with silent, explosive poison. I lunged forward and twisted the knob off, coughing. By God, Evelyn. Marcus appeared in the doorway, covering his nose and mouth. What are you trying to do? Kill us all. I didn't use the stovetop. I stammered, tears streaming down my face. I only used the oven. The oven isn't even on, Evie, he shouted, pointing at the dark display. You turned on the gas and walked away. This is it. This is the line. You can't live here alone. You're a danger to yourself. He called Aunt Linda right then and there, putting her on speakerphone so I could hear him recounting the near-death experience I had caused. I sank to the kitchen floor, sobbing. I felt my reality fracturing. Was I doing these things in a fugue state? Was grief rewriting my brain chemistry? The final blow came on Saturday. I needed to get out of the house. I just needed to drive, to go to the park, to breathe air that didn't feel contaminated by Marcus's lies. I grabbed my purse and went to the hook by the door where I kept my car keys. They were gone. Looking for these? I spun around. Marcus was holding my keys, dangling them from his pinky finger. But he wasn't smiling. He looked grim. I found them in the garbage disposal, Evie. I reached in to clear a blockage and there they were. If I had turned it on, your keys would have been shredded. And the disposal would be ruined. He tossed them onto the table with a heavy clatter. I think you should give me the keys to the car until we figure this out. For your own safety. I looked at the keys. There was a smudge of something slimy on the keychain. A piece of lettuce. I looked at Marcus. For a second the mask slipped. Just for a microsecond. I saw a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. He wasn't worried. He was winning. And in that moment the fog in my brain cleared. I remembered the water glass. I remembered the binder. I remembered the stove. I hadn't put the keys in the disposal. I treat my car like gold. And I realized something else. Marcus had been clearing a blockage in a disposal that had been working perfectly fine all morning. He thought he had broken me. He thought I was going to curl up and hand over the deed. But as I stared at that piece of lettuce on my keychain, I didn't feel crazy anymore. I felt a cold, hard rage. He wanted proof of my mental state? Well, I was going to give him proof. But it wasn't going to be the kind he wanted. I picked up the keys, ignored his demand to hand them over, and said in a voice that was deadly calm, I'm going for a walk, Marcus. Don't wait up. I walked out the door, but I didn't go to the park. I had a phone call to make and I couldn't let him hear it. I walked until my legs burned, fueled entirely by adrenaline and the bitter taste of betrayal. I didn't go to the park. I went to the little coffee shop 3 blocks over, the one with the barista who always remembered my order. I needed neutral ground. I sat in the back corner, hands shaking as I pulled out my phone. I wasn't calling a friend to vent. I wasn't calling Aunt Linda to beg for mercy. I was calling the university hospital's neurology department. I had done my research years ago when Mom first started showing symptoms. I knew who the best specialists in the state were. I knew that Dr. Sterling was the gold standard for cognitive assessment. The kind of doctor whose testimony was bulletproof in a court of law. Getting an appointment usually took months, but I had a secret weapon. I had volunteered at the hospital's fundraising gala for 3 years running. I knew the administrative coordinator, Sarah. When Sarah answered, I didn't waste time. I told her I needed a full, comprehensive cognitive battery and I needed it yesterday. I heard the hesitation in her voice, the clicking of a keyboard. Evelyn, we're booked out until August, she said gently. Sarah, please, I whispered, shielding the phone with my hand. This is an emergency. My future depends on it. Literally. If you have a cancellation, a lunch break, anything. There was a long pause. Can you be here tomorrow at 7 a.m.? Dr. Sterling has a lecture, but he's coming in early. I can squeeze you in before rounds. I'll be there, I said, tears of relief pricking my eyes. Now came the hard part. I had to go back into that house and play the role Marcus had written for me. If he suspected for 1 second that I was building a defense, he would escalate. He might change the locks or worse, physically bar me from leaving under the guise of protecting me. I had to make him think he had already won. I walked back into the house around dusk. Marcus was sitting in the living room watching TV with a smug, relaxed posture. He didn't even look up. Have a nice walk? I was about to call the police to send a search party. I took a deep breath and slumped my shoulders, making myself look small and defeated. I think I got turned around, I lied, my voice trembling. I ended up on 4th Street. I don't know how I got there. Marcus turned to look at me and his eyes lit up. It was sick. He was happy I was confused. See, he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. It's happening faster than we thought, Evie. You can't be wandering around alone. You're right, I whispered, staring at the floor. Maybe you're right about everything. He stood up and patted my shoulder, a victorious smirk playing on his lips. I'll call Mr. Henderson in the morning. We'll get the papers drawn up to transfer the deed. It's for the best. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing sequences of numbers and historical dates in my head, terrified that maybe the stress had affected me. What if I failed? What if the grief had actually caused some cognitive fog? The gaslighting was so potent that even though I knew he planted the keys in the disposal, a tiny part of me was still terrified of the test. At 6 a.m. I crept out of the house. I left a note on the counter. Ironic, considering the circumstances, saying I had gone to an early morning grief support group at the church. It was the perfect cover. Marcus would never question it because it fit his narrative of me being emotionally fragile. I arrived at Dr. Sterling's office with 10 minutes to spare. The testing was grueling. It wasn't just count backwards from 100. It was hours of pattern recognition, memory recall, logic puzzles, and rapid-fire questioning designed to expose even the slightest neurological deficit. I felt like I was back in college finals, but the stakes weren't a grade. They were my home, my reputation, and my freedom. There was a moment during the spatial awareness test where I hesitated. I was looking at a complex geometric shape, trying to mentally rotate it. Panic surged. Is this it? Am I failing? Then I closed my eyes for a second, pictured the blueprints of the house I had managed for years, the precise layout of the pipes I had fixed, the schedule I had balanced. My brain was a machine. I opened my eyes and solved the puzzle in 3 seconds. By the time we finished, it was nearly noon. I sat in Dr. Sterling's private office, my hands clasped so tight my knuckles were white. He sat across from me, reviewing the data on his screen, his face unreadable. The silence stretched on for an eternity. The ticking clock on the wall sounded like a sledgehammer. Finally, he took off his glasses and looked at me. Evelyn, he started, his tone serious. My heart stopped. Oh God. Marcus was right. I'm looking at your scores here, he continued, tapping the paper. And quite frankly, I'm wondering why you're here. You scored in the 99th percentile for memory retention and logical reasoning. Your processing speed is actually above average for your age group. You are not only cognitively fit, you are exceptionally sharp. I let out a breath that sounded like a sob. Are you sure? You're absolutely sure. I would bet my medical license on it, he said, signing the bottom of the official report with a flourish. Whatever concerns your family are completely unfounded. Medically speaking, you are as sound as a bell. He handed me the thick envelope, sealed with the hospital's official stamp. Do not open this until you need to, he advised. It's a legal document now. I walked out of that hospital feeling 10 feet tall. I clutched that envelope to my chest like it was a shield. I had the weapon. I had the proof. Marcus thought he was dealing with a confused, broken spinster who put binders in the fridge. He had no idea he was about to go to war with a woman who was certified as a genius by the state's leading neurologist. I drove home, stopped a block away, and hid the envelope inside the lining of my winter coat in the trunk. I couldn't risk him finding it. When I walked back into the house, Marcus was on the phone with the lawyer. Yes, she's agreed, he was saying. We'll see you in court on Friday to formalize the guardianship and the estate transfer. It'll be a quick hearing. He winked at me as I walked in. I offered him a weak, trembling smile. I'm just going to go rest, Marcus, I said softly. My head is swimming. You do that, Evie, he said, turning his back to me. Rest up. Oh, I will, I thought as I climbed the stairs. I need to be well rested to watch you crumble. The court date was 2 days away. He thought it was a formality. He thought he was walking into a coronation. He didn't know he was walking into an ambush. Friday morning arrived with a gray, oppressive sky that perfectly matched the knot of dread in my stomach. Even though I had the envelope tucked safely in my purse, the fear lingered. What if the judge didn't believe the report? What if Marcus's lawyer was too good? I walked into the county courthouse wearing my most conservative navy dress, clutching my purse with both hands, deliberately keeping my eyes on the floor. I had to maintain the illusion until the very last second. Marcus was already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table with his high-priced attorney and our Aunt Linda. They looked like a united front of concern and responsibility. When Marcus saw me, he gave me a sad, tight-lipped smile and patted the empty chair next to him, as if inviting a child to sit down for a timeout. I ignored him and took a seat at the defendant's table alone. The bailiff announced the arrival of Judge Vance, a stern-looking man with silver hair and a face carved out of granite. He took his seat and peered over his reading glasses at the courtroom. The air was thick with the smell of floor wax and old paper. Silence fell over the room, heavy and suffocating. Marcus's lawyer stood up first. He was a smooth talker, weaving a narrative that sounded heartbreakingly plausible. He described my rapid decline following our mother's death. He listed the incidents with clinical precision. The water glass in the sink. The binder in the refrigerator. The gas left on at the stove. The keys in the garbage disposal. Your Honor, the lawyer said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. It brings the family no joy to do this. Mr. Marcus is simply trying to protect his sister and the estate from her own unintentional negligence. Evelyn is clearly suffering from severe cognitive impairment brought on by grief and trauma. She is a danger to herself and the property. We are asking for immediate guardianship and control of the assets to ensure her safety. Judge Vance nodded slowly, taking notes. He looked at me with that same pitying expression I had seen on everyone's faces all week. Miss Evelyn, he said, his voice deep and rumbling. Do you have legal representation today? No, Your Honor, I said softly. I didn't stand up yet. Kept my voice small. Do you have anything to say in response to these claims? The judge asked. These are serious allegations regarding your mental fitness. This was it. The trap was set. Marcus was leaning back in his chair, already checking his watch, probably calculating how long it would take to get the deed transfer recorded. I stood up. I didn't use the table for support. I straightened my spine, rolled my shoulders back and lifted my chin. I looked directly at Judge Vance, letting the mask of the frail, confused spinster dissolve completely. The change in my demeanor was so sudden that Marcus actually sat up straighter, a frown creasing his forehead. Yes, Your Honor, I do, I said, my voice ringing out clear and steady, projecting to the back of the room. My brother has presented a very compelling story. However, it is a story built entirely on staged incidents and gaslighting designed to make me appear incompetent so he can bypass our mother's will. Objection. Marcus's lawyer shot up. These are baseless accusations from a woman who is clearly unwell. I have evidence, Your Honor, I cut in, not backing down. I reached into my purse and pulled out the thick, sealed envelope. On Wednesday morning, I underwent a comprehensive neurocognitive evaluation at University Hospital under the supervision of Dr. Arthur Sterling, the head of the neurology department. This is his official, sealed report, dated 2 days ago. The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Marcus's face drained of color. He looked at his lawyer, then at me, panic flickering in his eyes. The bailiff took the envelope from me and handed it to Judge Vance. The judge sliced it open with a letter opener, the sound tearing through the quiet courtroom like a gunshot. He pulled out the documents and began to read. He read the first page. Then he flipped to the second. Then he looked at the charts. Minutes ticked by. Marcus was shifting in his seat, whispering furiously to his lawyer. I stood like a statue, my heart pounding a victory rhythm against my ribs. Finally, Judge Vance lowered the papers and looked at Marcus. His expression had changed from pity to thunderous disapproval. Counselor, the judge said to Marcus's lawyer, are you aware of the contents of this report? No, Your Honor, the lawyer stammered. This report indicates that Ms. Evelyn scored in the 99th percentile for memory, logic, and spatial reasoning, Judge Vance announced, his voice echoing off the wood paneling. Dr. Sterling notes that her cognitive function is not only intact but superior. He explicitly states there is absolutely no medical evidence of dementia, confusion, or decline. The judge turned his gaze on Marcus, who was now turning a bright, blotchy shade of red. Mr. Plaintiff, you came into my courtroom and testified under oath that your sister is mentally incapacitated. Yet, the medical evidence from a leading specialist suggests she is sharper than anyone at your table. This leads me to believe that the incidents you described were indeed manufactured. That is a lie. Marcus shouted, jumping to his feet, abandoning all pretense of the grieving brother. She bribed the doctor. He's crazy. He put the keys in the disposal. I saw her. Sit down. Judge Vance slammed his gavel, the noise making everyone jump. You are on very thin ice, young man. Attempting to defraud the court and weaponize the legal system against a family member to seize assets is a grave offense. I am dismissing your petition for guardianship with prejudice. Furthermore, I am upholding the original terms of the estate. Ms. Evelyn is the rightful owner and executor. The judge looked at me, and for the first time his eyes were kind. Ms. Evelyn, the court recognizes your full competency and your ownership of the property. You are free to go. Marcus slumped back in his chair, defeated, red-faced, and humiliated. Aunt Linda wouldn't even look at him. She was busy pretending to search for something in her purse. I didn't stay to hear Marcus's excuses. I didn't stay to hear his lawyer try to salvage the situation. I walked out of that courtroom with my head held high, the heels of my shoes clicking a rhythm of freedom on the marble floor. I drove straight home, my home. The first thing I did was call a locksmith. By 4 p.m., every lock in the house had been changed. I packed Marcus's bags, his expensive suits, his Italian loafers, his toiletries, and I left them on the front porch. When he finally pulled into the driveway around sunset, I didn't even open the door. I watched from the living room window as he loaded his things into his car, looking angry and small. He paused for a moment, looking up at the house he tried to steal, and then he drove away. That night I sat in the kitchen. It was quiet. The oven was off. The keys were on the hook. The binder was on the shelf. I brewed a cup of tea and sat in the silence, but it wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. I had lost my parents, and in a way I had lost my brother too, but I had found something more important. I had found my voice, and I had kept my home. They said I was too old, too confused, and too weak. But as I sat there safe and sound, I knew the truth. I wasn't too old to inherit. I was just too smart to be tricked.